never forget the sound of that knock. It wasn't a polite tap or a friendly rattle. It was sharp. Demanding. The kind of knock that makes your heart race before your brain can catch up. When I opened the door, 3 people stood on my porch, 2 men in matching polo shirts with HOA board member stitched over their chests, and 1 woman in sunglasses, holding a clipboard like it was a weapon. Behind them, 2 police cruisers idled on the curb, red and blue lights flickering silently across my driveway. One of the officers stepped forward and said, "Sir, we've received a report that you're refusing to comply with your HOA's regulations." My stomach twisted. I blinked, confused, before replying, "I'm sorry, what?" The woman with the clipboard crossed her arms. "Don't play dumb, Mr. Collins. You've ignored 3 violation notices for your fence and unauthorized shed. We gave you ample warning." That's when I said it, the sentence that started everything. "I'm not under your HOA." The air went still. She raised an eyebrow, lips tightening into a line. "Excuse me?" I repeated myself. "This property isn't under your HOA. I checked the county records myself." That's when she turned to the officers and said, "You see? Non-compliance. We'd like to file a formal complaint." The officer looked uneasy. "Ma'am, this sounds like a civil issue." But before he could finish, she snapped, "He's threatening the integrity of our neighborhood." The second officer stepped closer to me, hand resting near his belt. "Sir, we just need to sort this out calmly." And there it was. The moment I realized how far they were willing to go to control something they didn't even own. My neighbors peeked from behind curtains as I stood on my own property, flanked by police lights, accused of breaking rules that didn't even apply to me. I didn't know it yet, but that moment, that single knock, was just the beginning. Because if they thought calling the cops would scare me into submission, they had no idea who they were dealing with. Cliffhanger. One of the officers suddenly stepped forward, saying, "Sir, we're going to need you to come with us." My heart dropped. "For what?" I asked. He said quietly, "For trespassing." My voice caught. Trespassing? On my own land? And that's when everything spiraled out of control. Unifew, I'm end of crises for me. It all started 3 months before that day. I had just moved into the quiet little town of Maple Creek, a place that, at first glance, looked straight out of a postcard. Clean streets, perfect lawns, neighbors who waved like they'd known you all their lives. I'd retired early after years of working construction, and just wanted some peace and quiet, maybe even grow a small vegetable garden in the back. The property I bought was an old farmhouse on the edge of the development, right where the neat row of HOA houses ended and the open land began. I made absolutely sure that my lot wasn't part of any homeowners association. I'd had enough of that kind of control years ago when I lived in a place that fined me for having my garage door open for too long. Quote, "The first few weeks were peaceful. I fixed up the fence, built a small shed for my tools, and started repainting the porch. Every evening, I'd sit out front, listening to the crickets and watching the sun dip below the hills. Then one morning, I woke up to find a letter taped to my front door. Notice of violation. It said in bold letters, "Your shed is not in compliance with HOA color standards. Please repaint to approved neutral tones within 14 days to avoid fines." I frowned, flipping through the rest of the letter. It was signed by the Maple Creek Homeowners Association Board. At first, I thought it was a mistake, so I called the number listed at the bottom. "Maple Creek HOA, this is Brenda speaking," a cheerful voice answered. "Hi, Brenda," I said. "I just got a violation notice, but I'm not part of your HOA. There must be some mistake." There was a pause. Then her tone changed, just slightly. "Oh, you live at 410 Maple Trail, correct?" "That's right." "That's right." She hummed. "Our records show your property falls within our jurisdiction." "Well," I said carefully, "your records are wrong." She laughed softly, like she was humoring a child. "Sir, we have community standards everyone must follow. I suggest you review your covenants." Click. She hung up. That's when I started digging. I went down to the county clerk's office the next day and requested the land records. The clerk, a kind old man named Harris, helped me pull the files. Sure enough, my property was recorded separately from the HOA's deeded area. There was no mention, no overlap, no tie whatsoever. It was mine, completely. Relieved, I thought that would be the end of it, but I was wrong. A week later, I found another letter. This one had bold red writing at the top. Final warning. They wanted me to repaint my shed and replace my fence to conform with community aesthetics. I ignored it. Then came the fines, $150 for non-compliance, $300 the next week. They left envelopes on my porch. They even sent emails. I kept ignoring them. Until one afternoon, as I was fixing the fence, a woman in a pink sun hat walked up my driveway. She introduced herself as Karen, yes, literally, Karen, and said she was the president of the HOA. She smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "We've noticed your property hasn't been brought up to code. I just came by to remind you that the deadline's tomorrow." "I already told your office," I said, wiping my hands. "I'm not part of your HOA." Her smile dropped. "Oh, everyone here is part of it, sweetie." "Not me," I said. "Check the county maps." She tilted her head. "You think that exempts you from the community?" "I don't need to be exempt," I said. "I was never in it." Her eyes narrowed. "You're making things difficult for yourself." And that was the first time she said it. "You don't want to make enemies of the board, Mr. Collins." I laughed, thinking she was joking. But when I looked at her, face cold, blank and serious, I realized she wasn't. Over the next few days, strange things started happening. My mailbox got knocked over. Trash appeared in my yard. Someone left a note that said, "We're watching." It was childish but unsettling. I tried to stay calm, to believe it would pass. I reminded myself that not everyone in the neighborhood could be like her. Then one morning, I stepped outside and saw something that made my blood boil. Bright orange construction tape stretched across my front gate with a wooden sign that read, "Property under HOA review, do not enter." And that's when I decided enough was enough. I tore the tape down, crumpled the sign, and tossed it straight into the trash. I didn't yell. I didn't curse. I just stood there breathing hard, staring at my quiet little home, the place I had bought for peace, realizing that peace was the last thing they were going to let me have. That night, I sat on my porch, looking out at the quiet street, wondering how people could become so obsessed with control over others, how kindness could vanish behind power. And that's when the headlights appeared. 2 cars rolled slowly to a stop in front of my house. Doors opened. Footsteps followed. Then came the knock. And as the police lights flickered across my lawn, I couldn't help but think, how did we get here? How did a group of neighbors go from baking cookies for newcomers to calling the cops on someone who just wanted to live peacefully? As one of the officers reached for my arm, I looked past him and saw her again. Karen standing at the curb, arms crossed, a faint smile on her face. And I knew right then. This was far from over. "Where are you watching from tonight?" The officer's hand on my arm felt heavier than it should have. My mind was spinning. And the only thing I could focus on was how surreal it was to be accused of trespassing. On my own land. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Sir," the officer said, his voice calm but firm. "We just need to clarify this situation. Please step aside." I shook my head. "Clarify? I've done nothing wrong. This is my property." Karen's smile widened, but it wasn't warm. It was the kind of smile that makes you wonder how someone can look so friendly and mean at the same time. "The community standards exist for a reason," she said. "We all follow the rules here. You must too." I stared at her, my hands trembling slightly. My fence, my shed, everything I had worked on for weeks. They wanted to take control of it. And I refused to let that happen. Finally, the officer stepped back, clearly realizing this wasn't going to be a simple discussion. "Ma'am, sir, I think this needs to be resolved through civil court, not through the police," he said, trying to calm everyone down. Karen's expression hardened. "The board has authority to enforce community standards. That includes fines, removal of structures, and other measures if necessary." My stomach sank. Other measures? What did she mean by that? I stepped toward her, keeping my voice low but firm. "Look, I've checked every record. My property is independent. If you want to fight this, we'll do it legally. But you will not intimidate me, and you will not send police to my house over something that doesn't exist." She laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "We'll see about that, won't we?" That night, after they left, after the police left, because Karen and her crew stayed a little longer, lingering like shadows on the edge of my yard, staring at my fence. The paint was fresh, the boards perfectly aligned, the small wooden gate swinging smoothly in the evening breeze, and yet, it all felt fragile. I remembered my father telling me stories about standing up to bullies when I was a kid, about how power sometimes hides behind the smallest threats, and courage is only tested when someone challenges you unfairly. I knew then that I couldn't let fear control me. The next morning, I found another letter taped to my door. This one was different, bigger, bolder. It read, "Fence and shed must be removed immediately. Failure to comply will result in legal action and police enforcement." I sighed. The war had officially begun. I called a friend, Miguel, who had dealt with HOA nonsense before. He laughed when I told him the story. Man, they're really going all in on this. But don't worry. You've got the law on your side. As long as your property is independent, they can't touch it. That gave me some comfort, but only a little. Karen was relentless, and her minions were everywhere. Over the next few days, I noticed strange things happening around my property. My mailbox was knocked over again. Footprints appeared in my garden at night. And once, I caught a glimpse of someone taking pictures from across the street. One morning I found a note pinned to my shed. Compliance is not optional. I realized they weren't just trying to enforce rules. They were trying to scare me into obedience. I decided to fight back, but quietly. I spent that day documenting everything. Photos of my property, copies of the county records, and videos showing the exact boundaries of my land. I even recorded the previous letters and notices. I was preparing for a legal battle, but I wanted to make sure I also stayed calm. Reacting angrily would only give them more ammunition. That night, I installed cameras around my property. Simple security cameras, nothing fancy, but enough to catch anyone trying to sneak around or intimidate me. I didn't know it yet, but this small action would become one of the most important moves I would make in the weeks to come. A few days later, the first real escalation happened. A work crew showed up. I had never seen them before. Big trucks, power tools, and orange safety vests. They drove up the driveway as if they owned it, ignoring my warnings. I ran outside. "Hey, who are you? Get off my property." One of the men stopped and looked at me blankly. "We're here on behalf of the HOA. You've been cited multiple times for non-compliance. We're here to rectify it." Rectify it? They were here to tear down my fence, my shed, everything I had built with my own hands. I grabbed my phone and called 911, explaining the situation. The dispatcher told me to stay calm and remain on my property. It wasn't long before the flashing lights of another police car appeared. I could feel my heart pounding as I waved at the officers, explaining the situation again. Karen pulled up behind the crew in her white SUV, clipboard in hand. "This is a community matter," she said smugly. "You need to follow the rules." "No," I said firmly. "You cannot do this. You have no legal authority over my property." The crew hesitated. The officers looked uncomfortable, glancing between me and Karen. After a tense few minutes, they left. But Karen stayed a moment longer, her eyes fixed on me. "You can't win this forever," she said, voice low but sharp. I watched her drive away, and I realized something. This was bigger than just a fence, bigger than a shed. This was about control, intimidation, and a test of who I was willing to be. That night, I didn't sleep much. I walked the perimeter of my property, checking cameras, making mental notes, and thinking about how to protect what was mine. I also thought about kindness, how the same empathy I tried to show neighbors and strangers alike had been met with hostility. I realized that sometimes, standing up for yourself is not the opposite of kindness. Sometimes, it's the ultimate act of respect for yourself and for your property. The next morning, as I was repairing the small gate, I noticed something strange. There was a second set of tire tracks different from the construction crews. They led from the road up to my side gate. And at the end, a single, small envelope sat in the grass. I picked it up. Inside was a note, written in the same bold handwriting as the previous warnings. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Prepare." I didn't know what prepare meant. But one thing was certain: whatever Karen had planned next, it wasn't going to be small. And that's when I noticed the shadow of a truck slowly pulling into my driveway. This time without a driver. It was empty, but it was positioned in a way that blocked my access to the street. I froze. The fight for my property had only just begun, and for the first time, I realized they were escalating, and they would stop at nothing. The morning sun cast long shadows across my yard. The kind that make everything look too quiet, too calm before something happens. The truck still sat across my driveway, blocking my way out. There was no driver, no keys, no note. Just a big, heavy pickup, sitting there, like a silent warning. I stood there for a long time, coffee in hand, staring at it. My mind raced through possibilities. Maybe it was just a prank. Maybe one of the neighbors parked it there by mistake. But deep down, I already knew. This had Karen written all over it. At 9:45 a.m., I saw movement down the street. The familiar white SUV appeared again, followed by a small convoy of cars and a van carrying what looked like tools or equipment. I felt a chill run down my spine. They stopped in front of my property, 5 people stepped out, Karen. 2 board members I recognized, and 2 men I didn't. One of them carried a clipboard. The other had a roll of yellow caution tape in his hand. Karen was dressed like she was going to a business meeting. Neat suit. Sunglasses, not a hair out of place. She looked around my yard like she owned it, then smiled coldly. "Good morning, Mr. Collins," she said, her voice sugar-sweet. "We're here to finalize the compliance order." "Compliance order?" I repeated, stepping off my porch. "There's no compliance order here. You people don't have jurisdiction over this property." Karen sighed, as if I were being unreasonable. "We've been more than patient. The board voted unanimously to enforce the community standards. That includes removing non-approved structures and barriers." I glanced at the man holding the roll of tape. "You're not stepping 1 foot on my property." "Oh," she said, tilting her head. "And who's going to stop us?" My jaw tightened. "The law." Her smirk widened. "You mean the same law that wouldn't take your side last time?" My pulse quickened. She was trying to get a reaction, to make me look like the aggressor, but I'd learned my lesson. I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. I reached into my pocket and held up my phone. The red recording light blinked. "You're being recorded. I suggest you leave." For the first time, her expression faltered, only slightly, but I saw it. "You think a little video will save you?" she asked quietly. "No," I said. "The truth will." Just then, a familiar voice called out from across the street. "Hey, what's going on here?" It was Mrs. Howard, my elderly neighbor who always waved when I walked by. She shuffled closer, leaning on her cane. "Why are there so many cars in front of Tom's house again?" Karen's fake smile returned instantly. "Good morning, Mrs. Howard. Just some community maintenance business." "Maintenance?" Mrs. Howard frowned. "He's not even in your association. You leave him alone." Karen's eyes flashed with anger, but she forced a polite nod. "We'll handle this privately." "Privately, my foot," Mrs. Howard said. "I've lived here 30 years. I know when people are being bullied." Karen ignored her. She waved to the 2 men. "Begin." That's when the real chaos started. The men walked toward my fence with tools in hand. One carried a crowbar. The other began unrolling caution tape across the grass. My heart hammered in my chest. I stepped in front of them. "Touch that fence and I'll have you arrested for trespassing," I said firmly. One of them hesitated. "Ma'am," he said, turning to Karen. "He's got us on camera." Karen snapped. "Keep going. You're authorized by the board." That was it. I called the sheriff's office right there in front of her. "Yes," I said loudly into the phone. "This is Thomas Collins at 410 Maple Trail. I have people trespassing on my private property. I need an officer here immediately." Karen's smile vanished. She whispered something to one of the men, and they both stepped back slowly, pretending to check their equipment. Within minutes, 2 sheriff's cruisers pulled up, different officers this time, but I recognized one of them, Deputy Lacey. He stepped out, looked around, and sighed. "Again?" Karen walked straight up to him. "Deputy, this man is in violation of HOA standards. We're simply enforcing compliance." Lacey raised an eyebrow. "And you have documentation proving his property is under your jurisdiction?" She blinked, hesitating for the first time. "It's pending review." "Pending review isn't enough," Lacey said. "If you don't have legal authority, this is trespassing." Karen's voice turned sharp. "This entire community relies on consistency. He's disrupting the appearance of the neighborhood." Lacey frowned. "Ma'am, with all due respect, you can't enforce aesthetics on private property outside your covenant. I'm going to need everyone except the homeowner to step off this land now." Karen looked like she wanted to argue, but she didn't. She turned on her heel and stormed toward her car. The others followed silently. But before she left, she turned back to me and said something that chilled me more than anything she'd said before. "This isn't over, Mr. Collins. You'll regret defying the board." Then she drove off. For a while, I just stood there, the sound of the engines fading in the distance. The quiet that followed felt heavier than before. Mrs. Howard came up beside me, patting my arm gently. "You did good, Tom," she said softly. "Bullies like her only win if you let them." I smiled weakly. "Thank you, ma'am. I just didn't think it would get this bad." She nodded. "They don't like being told no. Especially her." No. Later that day, I checked my security footage. The cameras had caught everything. The cars, the confrontation, even Karen's threats. I saved multiple copies, uploaded them to the cloud, and sent one to my lawyer friend, Miguel. He called me back almost immediately. Tom, this is gold. If they try anything else, you'll have a solid case for harassment and trespassing. Keep documenting everything. I thanked him and hung up. For the first time in weeks, I felt a little safer. That night, the air was cool and quiet again. I stood by my fence, listening to the crickets, the same fence they tried to tear down. It wasn't just wood and nails anymore, it was a symbol of standing my ground. I thought about kindness again. About how I had tried, at first, to handle things peacefully. But sometimes, kindness means having boundaries. It means saying no to people who think they can walk over you because they have titles or fancy clipboards. I took a deep breath and turned toward the house, ready to finally rest. That's when I noticed the faint glow in the distance, orange and flickering. At first I thought it was someone's porch light, but then I smelled it. Smoke. I ran to the side yard, my heart pounding. My shed, the one they'd been trying to remove, was on fire. Flames licked up the side, smoke pouring into the night sky. For a second, I just stood there, frozen. Then instinct kicked in. I grabbed the hose, spraying water wildly as I called the fire department with shaking hands. The shed crackled and hissed, but the fire spread too fast. Within minutes, it was gone. As the firefighters arrived and began dousing the last embers, one of them turned to me and said, "Sir, looks like this was started deliberately. You see anyone around before it caught?" I looked out toward the street. Karen's white SUV sat parked under the streetlight for just a second, then disappeared into the night. The fire department left, and I was left standing in the backyard, soaked from the hose, watching the charred remains of my shed smolder. It was my tools, my lawn equipment, my entire weekend project gone in a matter of minutes. I could still feel the heat radiating off the blackened wood, the smell of burnt pine filling the air. My heart was pounding, but underneath the fear and anger, there was something stronger, a burning resolve. I would not let them take my home. I would not let them win. The next morning, I woke to find a fresh letter taped to my front door. The paper was crisp, white, and printed in bold red letters. This is a warning. Compliance is mandatory. Failure to obey will have consequences. No signature, no name, nothing to trace it back. It felt like a threat, but I refused to let fear control me. I grabbed my phone and called Miguel. "They burned my shed last night," I said. My voice shook, but I held it together. I don't know if it's arson or intimidation, but I need advice. Miguel was calm, like he always was. "Tom, document everything. Photos, videos, letters, everything. I'll contact the county and see what we can do about trespassing and property damage. This isn't just harassment anymore. This is criminal." I hung up and surveyed the property again. The fence was still intact, but I knew it was only a matter of time before they tried something else. That's when I noticed the small white van parked across the street. It wasn't moving. I could see shadows inside. Someone was watching. I grabbed my camera and went outside. "Hey!" I shouted, waving. No response. The van stayed. I walked closer. Two men inside were whispering to each other, glancing my way. I waved again, louder. One of them muttered something and drove off slowly. I realized this was how they worked now, a silent siege. Not through confrontation this time, but through intimidation. Watching, waiting, and making me feel unsafe on my own property. Over the next few days, the pattern continued. Tires in my driveway that weren't mine. Strange footprints in the grass. More letters, with vague threats. Once, someone left a bag of trash by my gate with a note inside. "We know where you are every night." Every time I felt fear creeping in, I reminded myself of why I was fighting. I wasn't just protecting a shed or a fence. I was protecting my home, my autonomy, and my right to live in peace. And I also realized that kindness and empathy weren't about letting bullies walk all over you. Sometimes, it was about standing firm, quietly, without giving them the satisfaction of seeing you break. I called Deputy Lacey again and explained everything. "It's harassment, Tom," he said. "We'll patrol more often, and we can check cameras for any suspicious activity. But you have to keep documenting." I nodded. I'd become obsessed with documentation. Every letter, every truck, every shadow, everything was recorded. My front porch became a small command center, a laptop for videos, folders for letters, and sticky notes tracking times and events. But despite all of this, I tried to keep a normal life. I tended to my garden, mowed the lawn, and even started repairing the fence where the construction crew had scraped it. It was exhausting, but I knew showing strength was the only way to maintain my sanity and protect my home. Then one afternoon, something unexpected happened. A small group of neighbors came by, people I hadn't spoken to much before. Mrs. Howard led them. "Tom," she said, her voice firm. "We've been watching what they're doing to you. It's not right. We want to help." They brought tools, cameras, even snacks for the day. "We can keep an eye while you work," one of them said. "You're not alone." It was the first time since Karen had started her campaign that I felt a glimmer of hope. I realized that while some people wielded fear as a weapon, others used kindness as a shield. It gave me the courage to keep standing my ground. But the calm didn't last long. That night, I heard a noise outside, footsteps crunching on gravel. My heart leapt into my throat. I grabbed my flashlight and ran outside. The yard was empty, except for the glow of my security camera lights. Then I saw it, a faint silhouette moving near the back gate. I ran to the gate, swinging it open, flashlight in hand. "Hey, show yourself." The figure froze, then darted away. I ran after them, but they disappeared into the shadows. By the time I returned, I noticed something horrifying. The small vegetable garden I'd been nurturing for weeks had been trampled. Squashed tomatoes, broken stems, dirt upturned. Someone had been there, deliberately destroying it. I felt a surge of anger, but also clarity. They were escalating. They weren't just trying to scare me anymore. They were trying to hurt me, to break my spirit. The next morning, I checked my cameras again. I could see the intruder clearly, this time a person wearing dark clothing, hood up, gloves on, moving with deliberate precision. They spent a few minutes damaging the garden before disappearing down the street. I called Deputy Lacey immediately. "It's intentional," I said, voice tight. "They're escalating every night. Trespassing, destruction, intimidation. This isn't just a dispute anymore, it's criminal." He promised to increase patrols and advised me to stay inside after dark. I nodded, but I couldn't stay paralyzed with fear. Not when my home, my sanctuary, was under attack. I spent the next week reinforcing the property. I installed motion sensor lights, additional cameras, and even a stronger lock on the gate. I wanted to send a message. I wouldn't be intimidated. And with the help of Mrs. Howard and a few neighbors, we kept watch during the night. Then, just as I thought I might have caught a break, a new threat arrived. One morning, I walked outside and found the orange construction tape back across my driveway. But this time, there was a heavy padlock securing it, and a note attached. "Next time there will be no warning." I froze. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just harassment. This was a warning. And Karen, without a doubt, was behind it. I looked around, surveying my property. The fence was intact, the shed was gone, but my home itself felt threatened. Someone had made it clear that I wasn't safe. And that's when I realized the truth. This fight wasn't just about a fence or a shed. It was about control, about power, about a person who believed rules and intimidation could bend anyone to her will. I clenched my fists and whispered to myself, "Not me." Because no matter what they did, no matter how they escalated, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't giving up. I wasn't letting them win. And I was ready for whatever came next. The next morning, I found an envelope taped to my mailbox, bright red, stamped urgent in big bold letters. The moment I saw it, my stomach dropped. The HOA had never used that color before. Usually, they left white envelopes with typed notes about community violations or unpaid dues. But this screamed trouble. I tore it open right there, standing barefoot on my front lawn. The first line read, "Mr. Taylor, due to your continued defiance and failure to comply with the Homeowners Association's demands, your property is now subject to further action under Community Guidelines, Section 4B. I frowned. Community Guidelines, Section 4B? What even was that? The next paragraph made my hands tremble. Effective immediately, your property will be subject to inspection and potential restriction of access until compliance is achieved. Restriction of access? Did they mean they could block me from my own property? That's when I noticed the final line. Failure to cooperate will result in immediate escalation to local authorities. I laughed under my breath, half in disbelief. They'd already called the cops on me once. What else could they possibly do? But something told me this wasn't a bluff. I walked up my porch steps, still gripping the letter, and noticed something new. A small, shiny lock on my front gate. My lock had been replaced. They'd actually switched it. The HOA had come onto my land again. My heart raced. My dog, Max, barked from the backyard, as if sensing my anger. "It's okay, boy. I muttered, unlocking the side gate with my spare key. But it didn't fit. They'd changed that one too. That's when I saw the black SUV pull up across the street, tinted windows. No visible markings. I froze. Slowly, the window rolled down, and inside sat the HOA president, Mrs. Keller. Her sunglasses reflected the morning sun, her lips curling into a small, confident smile. "Morning, Mr. Taylor," she called out. "You might want to check your email. We've sent you your new access agreement." "My what?" I shot back, walking toward the curb. She stepped out of the SUV, immaculate as ever in her navy blue pantsuit and pearl earrings. "Your access agreement," she said sweetly. "You're not authorized to modify the new locks until you sign it." I laughed. "You can't be serious, Keller. This isn't your land. You don't control my property. You're way out of line." Her tone sharpened. "Actually, Mr. Taylor, you're inside the Heritage Meadows boundary, and as such, you're bound by our covenant." I pulled out my phone and opened the property app I'd used months ago. Funny, because according to the county lines, I'm not. My lot's about 50 feet outside your jurisdiction. She gave a fake smile that didn't reach her eyes. "That's debatable." And then she turned and got back into her SUV, leaving me standing there, dumbfounded and furious. I went back inside, tossed the letter on the counter, and called the county office. After a few minutes of waiting, a calm voice answered. "County Records Department, this is Lisa speaking. How can I help?" "Hi," I said, trying to steady my voice. "My name's Ben Taylor. I need to confirm property jurisdiction for 2204 Willow Lane. I've got an HOA claiming my property falls under their control." There was a pause, then the sound of typing. Let me see. "Okay, according to our records, your property is not listed under Heritage Meadows HOA." Relief washed over me, but before I could celebrate, she added, "However, the HOA has recently filed for an expansion amendment. It's pending review." I froze. "Expansion amendment?" "Yes," she said softly. "If approved, their jurisdiction would extend to include several adjacent lots, including yours." My relief turned into cold anger. They weren't just trying to control me. They were trying to change the law to make it official. That night, I sat on my porch with my laptop and dug through every HOA document I could find online. Meeting notes, bylaws, community newsletters, hours of dull, bureaucratic language. But then I found something buried in a PDF titled, "Boundary Expansion Proposal, 2025. Right there under New Parcel Inclusion was my address. They had already submitted it without my consent. I stared at the screen, stunned. The audacity, the manipulation. They were rewriting the rules while pretending to follow procedure. Then I noticed something else. The proposal had been signed by 3 people: the HOA president, the treasurer, and one acting legal advisor. I zoomed in. The name under acting legal advisor made my jaw drop. It was Mark Hensley, my neighbor. Mark was the guy who'd smiled at me every morning while jogging with his golden retriever. The same man who once borrowed my lawnmower and returned it with a 6-pack of beer as thanks. He was part of this? The next morning, I saw him across the street, waving cheerfully as if nothing had happened. I waved back weakly, pretending not to know. But inside, something shifted. It was no longer just an argument over property lines. It was personal. That evening, I took a slow walk around my fence line with a flashlight, checking for new signs or tampering. That's when I found a small metal stake hammered into the dirt behind my shed, painted bright orange with a number written on it. Lot 17. B. They were marking my land as theirs. I yanked the stake out and threw it across the yard. Just then, headlights swept across my lawn, another black SUV pulling up, this time with 2 men inside. They got out, wearing reflective vests, and started walking straight toward my backyard. I met them halfway. "Hey, this is private property." One of them flashed an ID badge. "We're with Heritage Meadows Enforcement. We're here for an inspection." I felt my blood boil. "You don't have any authority here," I said. "Step off my land." The taller one smirked. "Sir, you're making this harder than it needs to be. We can call the police again if you'd like." I clenched my fists. "Do it," I said quietly. "Call them." The shorter one hesitated, glancing at the other man. "Come on, let's just call them," I shouted. They froze. The night air was thick, the sound of cicadas buzzing in the silence. For a moment, no one moved. Then, as if deciding I wasn't worth it, they turned and walked back to their SUV, muttering something about reporting non-compliance. I stood there in the dark, heart pounding, as the taillights disappeared down the street. That's when I realized something. This wasn't going to stop. Not with warnings. Not with arguments. The HOA was escalating. And if I didn't act soon, they'd take control of everything I'd built. So that night, as the clock struck midnight, I made a promise to myself. If they wanted control, I'd show them what real control looked like. And I already had a plan. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise, restless. My mind was racing, thinking about the black SUVs, the orange stakes, the letters, and Mark Hensley, my so-called friendly neighbor, conspiring with the HOA. The past week had shown me just how far they were willing to go. And I couldn't let them escalate further. This time, I needed a plan. Not just reaction. I went into the garage and pulled out every piece of camera equipment I could find. I had security cameras around the property, but now I needed more. Motion-activated cameras, night vision, even a small drone that could patrol from above. I spent hours setting up every angle. The front driveway, the back fence, the side yard, even the empty lot adjacent to my property. Every camera was connected to my laptop inside, recording continuously. I felt a small sense of relief. At least if someone tried to sneak onto my property again, I'd have evidence. Proof. Concrete proof. By mid-morning, I noticed movement from the street. I squinted through the binoculars I'd set up and saw a familiar figure. Karen walking slowly down the sidewalk, sunglasses on, clipboard in hand. She was inspecting the properties along the street, but her eyes kept darting to mine. She paused, making notes, and then continued. I could feel her, calculating, plotting. I didn't move. I stayed hidden behind the garage, watching every step. My hands tightened around the binoculars. Karen wasn't just a neighbor with an overzealous sense of control. She was organized, persistent, and dangerous. That afternoon, I received another letter taped to my front door, in red ink. I tore it open, immediately. Mr. Taylor, this is your final notice. Immediate compliance with community standards is required. Failure to comply will result in escalation. The board has authorized further action to ensure conformity. Sincerely, Heritage Meadows, HOA. I laughed bitterly. Action? You've already burned my shed and changed my locks. What else do you want? I knew one thing. The next step would be worse than intimidation. By evening, I set up my drone and flew it over the adjacent lots, careful to keep it within my airspace. The night was calm, but I noticed movement near the far side of my property line. Two figures crouched near the fence, moving slowly, trying not to be seen. I zoomed in. One of them held a spray can bright orange. I immediately recognized it. Boundary markers. They were marking my property, trying to claim it visually, even though legally it was mine. I grabbed my phone and called Deputy Lacey. We've got trespassers again, I whispered, and they're marking my property with paint stakes. He promised to send someone immediately, but I knew I couldn't rely solely on the police. They couldn't be everywhere at once. I had to take control myself. Over the next few days, I became obsessed with surveillance. My laptop became a control center, cameras recording, drones patrolling, motion sensors alerting me to every sound. Every time a car drove slowly past my driveway, I noted the license plate. Every time someone paused near my yard, I captured their image. One night, I saw movement again, this time in the backyard. I grabbed my flashlight and went outside. Max, my dog, barked loudly at the intruder. A shadowy figure tried to flee, but I shouted, and they froze. Stop right there, I yelled. The figure darted behind a tree. I ran toward it, flashlight swinging, and saw the familiar reflective vest of the HOA enforcers. They had returned. My anger surged, but I stayed calm. I grabbed my phone and called 911. I have people trespassing on my property again, I said, voice tight. They are wearing reflective vests and are not authorized here. The operator reassured me that officers were on their way. Within minutes, lights appeared down the street. The intruders hesitated and then ran. I watched them disappear, heart pounding. I realized at that moment just how serious this had become. They weren't just sending letters or trucks. They were actively trying to intimidate me, to push me off my property. The next day, I discovered something even more unsettling. While reviewing the night footage from the backyard camera, I saw Karen herself, walking along the street at 213A, taking photos of my property with her phone. She moved like a predator, careful not to be caught by the lights. The footage clearly showed her sneaking around the edge of the yard, crouching, snapping pictures of my house, my driveway, and even the gates I had reinforced. I felt a mix of fear and fury. She had crossed a line. This was no longer about community standards. This was stalking. I called Miguel and showed him the footage. "Tom, this is serious," he said quietly. "You need to escalate this. We're beyond HOA disputes. This is harassment, trespassing, and possibly criminal surveillance." I nodded, thinking of the weeks of sleepless nights, the burned shed, the constant letters, the altered locks, the repeated threats. Karen and her crew had crossed every boundary, testing mine at every step. I knew I couldn't wait for them to act again. I had to be proactive. That evening, I installed a final layer of protection, a motion-activated floodlight system along the perimeter of my yard, and a small decoy camera near the front gate. It wasn't just for protection, it was a signal. If they tried to step onto my land again, they would be caught on camera, and I would have incontrovertible evidence. Later that night, I sat on my porch, Max curled up at my feet, watching the lights sweep across the lawn. The yard felt fortified, controlled, mine. I thought about everything that had happened. The letters, the burned shed, the trespassing, the threats, the neighbors who had turned against me. I realized that kindness and empathy weren't just for the people who deserved it. They were for me, too. The person who had the right to stand up and protect what was theirs, without losing sight of their humanity. As the night deepened, I noticed headlights flicker at the edge of the street, another SUV pulling up. I froze. The figure stepped out, a tall man in dark clothing, holding a clipboard. He walked slowly toward the orange stakes I had removed, pretending to inspect them. I held my breath. And then, suddenly the figure paused. He turned slightly and shouted, "Mr. Taylor, step out here." I ran inside, slamming the door, heart racing. Through the windows, I could see more SUVs arriving. Lights flickered across the lawn. I felt the familiar sting of anger, fear, and determination all at once. Karen's voice rang out, though I couldn't see her. "We're taking control. You can resist, but it's useless." I swallowed hard. I knew one thing for certain. This fight wasn't over, and the next move, whether by them or by me, would change everything. The sound of tires crunching gravel outside jolted me from my chair. It was almost midnight, yet the street was suddenly alive. Headlights sweeping across my lawn. Voices echoing faintly through the night air. I peered through the blinds and counted 3 black SUVs lined along the curb, their engines idling low. My stomach tightened. This wasn't a friendly visit. Max started barking, his deep growl cutting through the darkness. I hushed him and turned off the porch light. My heart thudded in my chest as I crouched by the window, watching shadows move toward my gate. The figures carried flashlights and clipboards, the signature look of HOA enforcers. But tonight, there were more of them. And standing in front, unmistakably, was Karen. Her voice carried clearly, even through the glass. "Mr. Taylor, we've come to enforce the compliance order you've repeatedly ignored." I clenched my fists. Compliance order? That wasn't even a real thing. I unlocked the front door, stepped outside, and shouted across the yard. "You can't just show up here at midnight. This is trespassing." Karen smiled, as if she'd been waiting for that. "Not if your property's under our jurisdiction. We have authorization from the board." "Your board doesn't mean anything here," I snapped. "You have no legal right to touch my land." That's when the situation escalated. 2 of the men behind her stepped forward, carrying bolt cutters. My heart stopped. "What do you think you're doing?" I demanded. Karen's tone turned icy. "If you won't open the gate voluntarily, we'll do it ourselves. You've left us no choice." Before I could respond, the metallic clang of the bolt cutters cut through the night. The padlock on my gate snapped open. Max barked wildly from the porch as I sprinted forward. "Stop! That's illegal!" I yelled, grabbing my phone. "I'm calling the police." Karen crossed her arms. "Already done," she said with a smirk. My stomach dropped. Within minutes, the distant wail of sirens filled the night. Blue and red lights flashed down the street. For a brief second, I felt relief until I realized Karen had called them first. The police car stopped in front of my driveway. 2 officers stepped out. One of them, Officer Brooks, looked familiar. He'd been the one dispatched the last time they'd called the cops on me. Karen immediately approached them, talking fast, waving documents in their faces. "Officer, this man has refused to comply with HOA ordinances. He's been verbally aggressive and obstructive. We have authorization to inspect his property tonight." I rushed up before she could continue. "That's a lie. This is my land outside their HOA. I have proof from county records. The officers exchanged a glance. Brooks sighed. All right. Everyone calm down. Let's take this one at a time. Karen handed over her paperwork, all neatly stapled and highlighted. I handed mine the county record confirming my property was not under their control. Brooks took both sets of papers, scanning them by flashlight. Looks like a jurisdiction dispute, he said finally. Not a criminal matter. But I can't have people breaking locks or entering property without consent. Karen's face tightened. Officer, this man is a threat to community order. I said enough, Brooks interrupted firmly. You all need to step back. No one's going inside tonight. The enforcers exchanged uneasy glances. I felt a small surge of relief until Karen pulled out her phone and muttered something I couldn't hear. Within moments, 2 more SUVs rolled in. One of the new arrivals stepped out wearing a formal blazer, carrying a briefcase. I'm the HOA's legal representative, he announced loudly. My relief evaporated. He walked straight up to Officer Brooks and said, This matter has been escalated to civil enforcement. We're exercising our right to perform a property boundary verification tonight. Brooks frowned. That's not happening, he said flatly. You'll do it through the county, not at midnight. But the lawyer smiled like a man who knew the system too well. We have interim approval to proceed. He held out a document stamped with something that looked official, but it wasn't from the county. It was an HOA letterhead stamped, Preliminary Authority. Brooks rubbed his temple. You're testing my patience, he muttered. If you cross that fence line again, I'll arrest whoever's responsible for trespassing. Understood? Karen's smile faltered. She gave a tight nod. Good, Brooks said. Now, everyone go home. He turned to me. Mr. Taylor, I suggest you keep your documents close. This is going to escalate to a legal dispute if they keep pushing. I nodded. Trust me, officer. I'm ready. The officers drove off a few minutes later. The SUVs followed slowly, Karen glaring at me through the window as she left. The moment they were gone, the silence hit thick, uneasy, heavy. I locked the gate again, reinforced it with a steel chain, and went back inside. Max followed, tail low, still growling under his breath. I sat on the couch, replaying everything in my head. They'd crossed the line literally and legally. They were trying to wear me down, hoping I'd give up, but I wasn't backing down. Still, one thing gnawed at me. That Preliminary Authority stamp. I'd never seen it before. Was it fake? Or had they found some loophole? I needed to know. The next morning, I drove straight to the county office. Lisa, the clerk who had helped me before, looked up as I entered. Mr. Taylor again, she said, half smiling. What's happened now? I handed her the copy of the document I'd photographed last night. They showed this to the police, said it gave them permission to inspect my property. Is this real? She adjusted her glasses and studied it carefully. After a moment, she shook her head slowly. No, this isn't an official county authorization. It's a private HOA notice. They designed it to look official. Clever, but meaningless. My stomach twisted. So they're forging documents now? She hesitated. Not exactly forging, but it's certainly deceptive. They're using fake authority to intimidate you. I leaned back, exhaling hard. So, what do I do? She lowered her voice. File a complaint. Not just with the county, with the state housing department. They take this kind of abuse seriously. And document everything you can. I nodded slowly. Oh, I've got documentation, I said, thinking of my cameras, my drone footage, my files. That night, I went through all my recordings again. Every clip of trespassing, every late-night inspection, every shadow that crossed my property line. I labeled each one with timestamps and notes. By 3 a.m., my laptop was full, a digital vault of evidence. But as I sat there, exhausted, I noticed something new on the live camera feed, a faint flicker of movement in the front yard. I zoomed in and froze. There, half hidden behind the hedge, stood Karen. Alone. Staring directly at one of my cameras. She didn't move, didn't flinch, just stared, expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she raised her phone and smiled. The next second, the feed went dark. My cameras were offline. And that's when I realized they weren't just watching me anymore. They were inside the system. For a few seconds, I sat frozen in the dark, staring at my laptop screen. Every single feed, front yard, back gate, side fence, porch had gone black all at once. The cameras weren't damaged. The signal had been cut. My home, my fortress, was suddenly blind. I grabbed a flashlight and moved slowly through the house. Max followed close behind, his ears pinned back, tail stiff. The only sounds were the faint ticking of the wall clock and my own heartbeat hammering in my chest. "Easy, boy," I whispered, though I was saying it more for myself. I checked the router dead. The Wi-Fi signal was gone too. Someone had killed my power to the surveillance system. But how? My backup battery was still on. That's when I noticed something strange. The breaker box in the garage was slightly open. I hadn't touched it since installing the cameras. I stepped closer, the flashlight beam trembling slightly in my hand. The main switch had been flipped off manually. Someone had come inside my property again. My breath hitched. I scanned the garage floor, faint muddy footprints, leading from the side door to the breaker. The side door's lock had been forced. I swallowed hard. Whoever had done this knew exactly what they were doing. I went back inside and locked every door and window, then sat by the front window, watching the street. It was eerily quiet. No cars, no lights. Just the heavy silence of a neighborhood asleep or pretending to be. I stayed awake until dawn, flashlight in one hand, my phone in the other. At sunrise, I walked outside and examined the side door. The lock wasn't just broken. It had been pried open cleanly with a flat tool. Professionals. This wasn't just random vandalism, this was targeted. As I walked back toward the porch, I noticed something even stranger. The orange boundary stakes that I had thrown away 2 nights ago were back, not just back, but rearranged. This time they formed a crooked line, slicing through the middle of my backyard like some kind of threat. Each stake had a fresh label attached. Written in thick, red marker were 3 words. "You can't win." I stood there, frozen, the early morning breeze brushing against my face, my jaw clenched. They wanted me scared, paranoid to give up. Not this time. I took pictures of everything: the stakes, the broken lock, the footprints. Then I drove straight to the sheriff's office. Deputy Lacey met me in the lobby, coffee in hand, looking tired but alert. "Mr. Taylor," he said, eyebrows rising. "You look like you haven't slept." "I haven't," I said flatly. "They broke into my property last night, forced my door, cut my power, left threats." He set down his cup, suddenly serious. "You're saying they entered your home?" "Yes," I said, handing him my phone with the photos. "And look at this. They even tampered with the electrical box." He scrolled through the pictures slowly. "That's bold," he muttered. "And stupid." He looked up at me. "All right. I'm filing this as criminal trespass and property tampering. I'll assign a patrol to drive by for the next few nights. But, Ben." He paused. "You might want to think about legal representation. These people aren't acting like a normal HOA anymore." I nodded. I knew he was right. By noon, I had reached out to a local attorney named Rachel Quinn, who specialized in property and HOA disputes. She agreed to meet me that afternoon. Her office smelled faintly of coffee and paper. She listened quietly, as I told her everything. The burned shed, the letters, the fake documents, the cops, the trespassing, the midnight inspections. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, tapping her pen against a notepad. "Ben," she said carefully, "what they're doing is intimidation. Classic power play tactics. They're hoping you'll break first. But," she flipped through the photos I'd given her, "if they broke into your property, that's no longer a civil issue. That's criminal." She pointed at one of the images. "These stakes, the handwriting, the lock damage, we can use all of this. But I need one thing from you." "What's that?" "Don't react emotionally, don't confront them. Let's hit them where it hurts legally." I nodded slowly. "You have my full cooperation." She smiled slightly. "Good. Because I'm about to make their lives very uncomfortable." That night, I returned home, feeling a strange mixture of exhaustion and relief. For once I had someone on my side who knew how to fight them the right way. But that sense of calm didn't last long. At around 10 p.m., I heard the faint whir of an engine outside, low, steady, mechanical. I peeked through the blinds and saw a drone hovering just above my fence line. It wasn't mine. Its red light blinked rhythmically as it drifted slowly over my backyard. I rushed to my laptop, checking my own drone control app, offline. The intruder's drone was broadcasting a locked signal encrypted. They were spying on me now. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, shining it up at the drone. It didn't move. Instead, it rotated. pointing its small black camera directly at me. "Enough," I shouted into the air. "You're trespassing." The drone hovered a few seconds longer, then zipped away, vanishing into the night sky. I ran back inside and checked the time. 10:47 p.m. I documented it. All the sound, the movement, the direction. Every second mattered now. Minutes later, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number appeared on the screen. "You shouldn't have involved a lawyer." I froze. My hand tightened around the phone. Before I could reply, another message came through. "You can't protect what doesn't belong to you." I turned off the phone immediately and unplugged the Wi-Fi. The messages stopped. That night, I barely slept. Every noise made me flinch: the creak of the stairs, the wind brushing against the windows, the faint hum of distant traffic. I kept Max close beside me, his head resting on my lap as I sat on the couch, flashlight in hand. By morning, I walked outside to get some air and froze. Every single camera I had installed had been ripped from its mount. The wires hung loosely, the screws still warm from friction. Whoever had done it was careful, deliberate, and fast. But what chilled me most wasn't the missing cameras. It was the note taped to my front door. Typed this time. No handwriting, no color. "You're being watched from inside now." I stood there, feeling my pulse pound in my ears. Inside? I turned slowly, scanning the windows, the porch, the curtains fluttering gently from the morning breeze. Max barked once, loud and sharp, at the far end of the living room. And that's when I heard it, a faint click, like a camera shutter, from somewhere deep within the house. I froze. Someone had been inside. Someone was inside. I didn't move at first. The sound, that faint, deliberate click, echoed in my head long after it stopped. Max's bark had turned into a low growl, deep and uneasy. He was staring at the hallway that led to the basement, his fur bristling like static. "Stay," I whispered, though my own voice was trembling. I took a slow step toward the hall, every instinct in my body screaming at me to get out. The air felt heavier, thicker, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. I reached for the light switch. Nothing. The power was out again. The house, once my refuge, now felt like a trap. My flashlight beam sliced through the darkness, catching tiny motes of dust hanging in the still air. Somewhere beneath my feet, the wooden floor creaked, but not from me. Someone was down there. I moved to the kitchen counter where I kept a small emergency weapon, a heavy-duty wrench from the shed. I gripped it tightly, forcing my breathing to slow. "Who's there?" I called out. "I know someone's in this house." No answer, just silence. Then another click, softer this time, like a camera shutter being pressed from behind a wall. I edged toward the basement door. It was slightly ajar, something I never left open. A faint, cold draft drifted through the gap, carrying the scent of damp wood and earth. "All right," I muttered under my breath. "If you want to play games." I pushed the door open and descended, step by slow step. The flashlight beam danced across shelves, storage boxes, and old furniture. Everything looked untouched except for the far wall. There, in the corner, was one of my old security cameras, one that had gone missing days ago, now mounted crudely to a small tripod, a red light blinking faintly. It wasn't connected to my network. Someone had repurposed it. I crouched down, examining it. A new wire ran from the camera into the wall through a freshly drilled hole. My heart thudded. The wire disappeared behind the insulation, up toward the floorboards. Someone had been inside the walls. I yanked the wire free and followed it along the beam line. It led to a small, square hole near the ceiling, a vent access I hadn't touched in years. I climbed up a short stepladder and shone my light inside. At first, I saw nothing. Then something metallic glimmered. Another small device, square, black, with a blinking light. Not one of mine. That's when I heard it again. Click. But this time, not from the vent. It came from upstairs. I spun around, flashlight shaking. Max barked again from the living room, frantic, urgent. I bolted up the stairs, wrench in hand, nearly tripping on the last step. The front door was still locked. The windows were intact. But the living room curtain had been moved, pulled halfway aside. And on the couch sat a small object that hadn't been there before, a phone. Not mine. I approached it slowly. It was an old smartphone. Screen cracked, battery indicator flashing red. On the screen was a single open app, the camera recording in selfie mode. I turned it toward me. The timestamp read live. I was being streamed. Before I could react, the phone vibrated, and a notification popped up across the screen. Unknown viewer. Smile for the HOA. The phone screen went black. That was it. I snapped. I grabbed the phone, stormed to my truck, and drove straight to Rachel Quinn's office. I must have looked insane, disheveled, shaking, covered in dust, but I didn't care. I slammed the phone down on her desk. "They were inside my house," I said, voice breaking. "Inside the walls, Rachel. They planted cameras. They're watching me." She looked at the phone, her expression shifting from concern to anger. This is illegal surveillance," she said. "They've crossed every possible line." "Then let's end this," I said. She nodded firmly. "We will, but we have to do it smart. I'll file for an emergency protective order and contact the county inspector. They'll have to investigate the property and every unauthorized structure nearby. If the HOA's been accessing your home through easements or shared lines, we'll expose it." She paused, then added, "In the meantime, Ben, stay somewhere else tonight, please." I agreed. I didn't want to spend another second in that house. That night, I checked into a small motel off Route 9, the kind with humming fluorescent lights and faded wallpaper. I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed every noise, every shadow, every sound of that camera clicking. Around midnight, my phone buzzed again. A new message. No number, just text. "You shouldn't have left. We liked watching you there." I dropped the phone instantly. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely breathe. Then another message. "We're closer than you think." I turned off the phone and yanked the motel curtains shut. For the first time, I truly wondered if this went beyond the HOA. The next morning, Rachel called me. "Ben," she said, "you're not going to believe this, but I found something." "What?" "The HOA's incorporation papers. They were dissolved 2 years ago. Legally, they don't exist. Whoever's been contacting you isn't the HOA at all." I froze. "Then who are they?" "I don't know yet," she admitted. "But someone's pretending to be them, maybe to push you off that land. There's money tied to those lots, Ben. Someone wants that property bad enough to scare you into giving up." That hit me like a punch. My land, my father's land, wasn't just in their way. It was the prize. I drove back to the property that afternoon, against Rachel's advice. I needed to see it for myself. The road was quiet, the sun dipping low. But as I turned into the driveway, my stomach dropped. The stakes were gone, every single one of them. The yard looked untouched, eerily perfect. Even the broken lock had been replaced, new, shiny, unmarked. And pinned to my front door was another letter, printed neatly on white paper. "We warned you, Ben. You can't protect what's buried here." I read it twice, my hands trembling. Buried here? I dropped to my knees, scanning the yard, the ground, the flower beds, the spots near the shed. There were faint signs of digging. Someone had been searching for something. But what? That's when I noticed the basement window half open. I ran inside, down the stairs, flashlight swinging wildly. The hole in the wall where I'd found the camera had been expanded. The insulation was ripped out. Dirt scattered across the floor. Someone had dug through the foundation into the earth below. My light caught something metallic embedded in the dirt, an old, rusted box, half unearthed. Max barked behind me, the sound sharp and anxious. I brushed the dirt away and froze. The box wasn't just metal. It had a property tag, a government one. Stamped faintly across the lid were 3 letters that made my blood run cold. U.S.D.O.E., Department of Energy. My breath caught. This wasn't just about an HOA anymore. And as the house creaked above me, footsteps slow and deliberate, I realized, whoever they were, they knew exactly what was buried under my land. For a long moment, I couldn't move. The metallic box sat half buried in the dirt, that faded government seal staring back at me like an eye from the past. U.S.D.O.E., Department of Energy. My flashlight trembled as I ran my hand over the letters, the rust flaking under my fingertips. Whatever this was, it wasn't just old junk. It was deliberate, hidden, and someone didn't want me to find it. Above me, the sound of slow, heavy footsteps moved across the living room floorboards. Max was barking furiously now, his nails scratching against the basement stairs as he tried to get to me. Whoever was up there wasn't trying to be quiet anymore. They wanted me to know. I gripped the wrench tighter and whispered, "It's okay, boy. Stay." But before I could even decide whether to run or hide, a low metallic bang echoed from upstairs. Then another, and another, like someone was hammering nails into the doorframe. My blood went cold. They were sealing the exits. I grabbed the box and yanked, pulling it from the dirt with a grunt. It was heavier than I expected, maybe 30 pounds. A small padlock clung to the front, rusted shut. I didn't have time to open it, not now. I tucked it under my arm, sprinted up the stairs, and shoved the door open. The living room was empty. The front door, however, wasn't just locked, it was nailed shut. Thick wooden boards had been nailed across it from the inside. The hammer and nails left scattered on the floor. My flashlight beam flickered across the window, and that's when I saw it. A white sedan parked right across the street. Its headlights were off, but I could see silhouettes inside, watching. I didn't stop to think. I ran to the back door, kicked it open, and bolted into the yard, with Max right behind me. The cold night air hit me like a slap. My heart thundered in my chest. I sprinted toward the shed, ducking low as the crunch of gravel echoed behind me. Someone was chasing. I dove behind the shed and crouched, clutching the box close. Max growled softly beside me. A flashlight beam swept across the lawn, steady, searching. It paused for a moment on the shed door, just inches from where I hid. I could hear the man's breathing. Then his voice. "Ben," he called softly. "You shouldn't have dug it up." My whole body went rigid. That voice, I recognized it. It was Daniel, the HOA president. I didn't answer. I barely breathed. Daniel's flashlight beam lingered a moment longer before moving on. His footsteps crunched toward the house. When the sound faded, I ran. I didn't stop running until I reached the edge of the property line, where the old boundary stakes used to stand before they'd been stolen. I hid the box beneath a fallen log and kept running to my truck parked down the hill. I drove straight to Rachel's office, even though it was well past midnight. She answered after the third knock, wearing a robe, and looking startled. "Ben, what on earth?" "Rachel," I gasped, setting the box down on her kitchen table. "They broke into my house again. They sealed the doors. And I found this in the foundation." She blinked, staring at the faded DOE tag. "Department of Energy?" "Yeah," I said. "And Daniel's out there. He was on my property tonight." Rachel's face hardened. "All right," she said quietly. "Then this stops now." She grabbed her phone and started dialing. "I'm calling the sheriff and a federal contact I know. If this is tied to the DOE, it's out of local jurisdiction." While she spoke, I sat back and tried to steady my shaking hands. I couldn't stop picturing Daniel's voice in the dark. The way he said, "You shouldn't have dug it up." It wasn't a threat, it was a warning. By morning, the sheriff's team arrived at my property, with 2 federal inspectors. I followed them as they combed through the basement and surrounding yard. They unearthed several more small devices buried in the soil, strange, metallic tubes about the size of soda cans. One of the inspectors turned to the other, his face pale. "These shouldn't be here," he muttered. I stepped closer. "What are they?" He hesitated. "Old radiation monitors. Government grade. These went out of circulation in the 82nds. Rachel frowned. "Radiation monitors? What would those be doing under a residential property?" "Unless," the inspector said slowly, "this area wasn't always residential." I felt a chill crawl down my spine. They ran some tests and confirmed what I was starting to fear, faint traces of radiation beneath the ground. Not enough to harm anyone yet, but enough to prove something was buried there long before my house was built. That afternoon, Daniel and the HOA board showed up, or, at least, the people who claimed to be the board. They stood just beyond the police tape, shouting that this was unauthorized excavation. One of the deputies stepped forward and told them to leave, but Daniel refused. "This is private HOA business," he yelled. "He has no right." Rachel cut him off sharply. "You have no HOA, Daniel. It was dissolved 2 years ago. We have the legal filings." The look on his face said it all. The deputies detained him for trespassing, but before they led him away, he turned to me and said something that still echoes in my head. "You think this ends with me? You have no idea what that land was for." Over the next week, investigators traced everything back to an old government project from the late 1970s. Something to do with experimental waste storage, being later abandoned and covered up when the land was repurposed for housing. The HOA had been a front for a private group trying to buy out the remaining lots quietly so they could extract whatever was left beneath. Rachel called me one evening as the sun set over the fields. "Ben," she said, her tone soft but proud. "The land's officially yours. The fake HOA's being investigated, and the county will handle the cleanup. You did it." I looked out over the yard where the holes had been filled. where Max now played freely again. We did it, I said. But deep down, I knew something still didn't sit right, because when the agents left that day, they didn't take the DOE box. They said it was empty. Except it hadn't been empty when I found it. I remember the weight, the heaviness, the way it clinked when I lifted it. Whatever was inside was gone before I brought it to Rachel's. Someone had taken it. And 2 nights later, as I sat by the fire trying to clear my thoughts, my phone buzzed with a single text from an unknown number. "Nice work, Ben. You saved the land for us." No name, no number, just that. I stared at the message, feeling the weight of everything that had happened, the fake HOA, the buried secrets, the lies. Maybe I'd won the battle, but whatever I'd uncovered out there wasn't meant to be found. And I had a feeling that even though the cops were gone, the real watchers were still out there in the shadows, patient, waiting. Because some things, once unearthed, never truly go back to sleep. Where are you watching from tonight?